It's Benno here, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by the lead man for Pseudo Echo, BRIAN CANHAM. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, good, man. How you going?
Everyone probably talks to you about this, but Funky Town, that is the one thing that I remember Pseudo Echo for.
Yep, yeah, like most people, yeah.
Yeah, so how did Funky Town come about? Before we get into all the other stuff, tell me about my favourite song.
Well, I guess we sort of did it between albums, although it did get bundled onto the Love and Adventure album later on. But it was sort of between the two albums, and we're kind of just a bit bored live, you know. We were trying to think of what else we can explore. I was just out with a mate who was a DJ in the 80s, and we're just sort of sitting around sort of reminiscing about old songs, and we've chucked that on and sort of had a bit of a laugh. And then I think I said I should do this with a band. We should just play it. So we started playing it live and got such a great reaction to it that it was one of those things where I sort of went to the record company and management and said, we're going to record this cover. I know at first there was a really mixed response. Most of them were really anti. They thought it was a really dumb idea and said, it's dead in the water. What do you want to do a disco song for?
Yeah.
You know, I want to give it this different treatment, and got it all worked out in my head. So I kind of really went out on a limb and took a chance with it. And
it certainly paid off.
Oh, yeah, fortunately for me, because I really went out on a limb on it, let me tell you.
Yeah, now what was it like? Because Pseudo Echo sort of pioneered that new 80s electro-pop sound, and being pioneers, there's certain issues and troubles with that.
That's right.
So how did you musically and creatively find your careers were shaped by being pioneers in that area?
It was definitely a bit sort of risky because, you know, all the bands were pub rock bands, and there weren't many bands that we could support or open for or, you know, even be on the bill with. So that was a challenge in itself. We were kind of determined to stick to it, and, you know, we'd been influenced by a lot of sort of, you know, underground stuff we'd heard through Europe and things, so we were keen to sort of explore this new sound. But I guess fortunately for us, you know, the songs were pop songs, and that didn't matter what sort of guys they were in, so they worked. But it didn't come without its troubles, there's no doubt. Like, technology-wise, was a nightmare.
Yeah.
You know, it was all new technology, and it used to break down all the time, and, you know, you would really, could be really awkward.
So where did Pseudo Echo find most of their success?
As far as country-wise, you mean?
Yeah, because I see you've got some amazing album sales in excess of 1 million worldwide. Sure. You've got your #1 single on the Billboard US Dance Charts, a top 10 on the Billboard US Pop Charts, top 10 single in the UK, #1 single in Australia for 12 consecutive weeks, which is good effort.
Sounds all good, doesn't it?
A #1 single in Canada, Sweden, Finland, and
all the facts, I never even knew we had that many. That's great.
This is the only interview I've ever done research for in my life, so I'm just showing it off.
Good job. To be honest, we probably have the most sort of profile success in Australia, although if we're counting numbers, you know, maybe in the US, because there's just a zillion more people.
Larger market.
Yeah, so yeah, but I think proportionally, definitely Australia. You know, it's we're known here for, you know, a decade of having success and several top tens, whereas in the US we've probably had 2 top tens and a couple of top 40s, and we're kind of, you know, relatively known.
Yeah, now like a lot of bands, you had a bit of trouble keeping your lineup the same.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some good stories there.
Yeah, well, I guess, look, you know, the first lineup we were just kind of still finding our sound and finding our feet, really. It was the first lineup that, you know, took the name Pseudo Echo, and you know, we were really on our way, but we soon found that there was an age difference that, you know, it seems hysterical now to think that, you know, a couple of years difference between guys is going to make a difference, but when you're 20 and one's 27 or something like that,
yeah,
it's a big gap. And I think that Tony Lugton, the original keyboard player, he was great. He really helped us, you know, find that sound, but his ability was really limited. So, and he was more of a guitarist.
Yeah.
So throwing him on the keyboards was really that was a bit hard for him, and so that was more of a musical decision when Tony left. And you know, James was fresh and young, and he was like 17, and he was you know, absolute genius on the keyboard. So all of a sudden we were just let loose. You know, it really opened up a lot of doors.
Yeah. So how do you find the Pseudo Echo sounds changed album by album with the lineup change?
Yeah, I think it is to do a bit with the lineup, definitely, because James came. You know, I mean, obviously the sound of the 80s was changing too, and we were just kind of keeping up with it. With James, because of the ability, we really hit it off musically, and we would just jam together and roll a tape and create all these sort of bits and pieces, and then make songs out of them. I think because of his ability, it opened up a lot of doors, and so the music became slightly more, just a bit more technical rather than the more earlier new romantic sound.
Yeah.
And even when his brother Vince joined on the last record, Race, obviously then we were losing sight a bit of where we started, but you can hear how it's rocked out a bit, because Vince was more of a drummer from a rock sort of background.
So with the electro sound, I mean, there's a lot of bands with a similar sort of sound, or groups with a similar sort of sound these days that, as we mentioned before, Pseudo Echo was really a pioneer for. Do you find that your music was better suited to the studio as opposed to a live touring show?
Well, look,
given the technology at the time.
On a whole, yes, because it was a real, really experimental and a studio kind of based thing with lots of configurations of different layers of keyboards and sounds. But that said, we were obsessed with reproducing that live. Absolutely obsessed with it, to the point of craziness. And we would just have all this gear on the road, and look, we still do. We still are nuts about it. I mean, I'm obsessive about it. I guess having a production background. It's got to be right, and that was one of the reasons why we didn't reform for so long. I just said, look, I'm not going to do it unless it sounds exactly like it's supposed to sound.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be a recipe for disaster back then. It's a bit easier now because technology has advanced so much.
Yeah. So what was the major contributing factor to you guys going, hey, let's give this another crack?
Well, I just got asked to do it so many times.
Yeah.
And, I didn't want to do it for a long time because it was still kind of like too recent and too much of a sort of a thing that was in the past. And then it's sort of, time sort of does amazing things where you look back at it in a fond way, and then you start to sort of think, that was good, and the fans are grown up and they're not going to scream and chuck their undies at you anymore, and they're going to listen to your songs. And
well, at least if the fans now chuck their undies at you, you could parachute down from a plane.
Yeah, use them for a doona.
Yeah.
So, there was a guy in Sydney, actually, who was quite instrumental in it, who ran the Retro Club.
Yep.
And he just asked me, a couple of years in a row, could you do it? And then, they just sort of came up with a really good offer we couldn't refuse. And he said, look, you got all the time you like to get it right and do this and do that. I didn't actually have all the original lineup back then. I had Pierre, really, and I used one of the guys from Chocolate Starfish and one of the guys from the Bad Loves, who were we all grew up together, and they were real Pseudos fans too. So they sort of blended right in, and it was a really good match. But the other guys were off doing another project at the time, so we sort of did that, and it was great. We just got such a buzz out of it, and the attendance was massive, and it really came together, and so we just sort of never stopped.
Well, I'm going to jump back to your albums there for a bit, because early on Pseudo Echo did really, really well with some of the albums there, and then you had a bit of a break, and you came out with Teleporter, the 2 CD set. Now, because you had so much success earlier on, and there was that break, was there a lot of pressure for you guys to really recreate that success with the new album Teleporter?
I mean, you would think yes, but it was such a low-key project. I mean, honestly, it was a small, tiny independent label. There wasn't really a lot of pressure at all because we didn't do it through a major label. And we sort of just did it because we thought, well, let's just regenerate some new music. So that's why we had a crack at it, really. We've never really performed any of it live, of the Teleporter stuff. And ironically, one of the songs that was the most successful on it wasn't even done with Pseudo Echo. It ended up being done with another project I had called Origin. And it was a song called Suddenly Silently, which we'd recorded for the Teleporter album, and it came up great and sounded great, but just right at the last minute, because, this new vehicle, Origin, was there was a buzz on it, we ended up doing it with that, and it was a big success, but sometimes I a bit regretful that I didn't do it now with Pseudos, because it would have been, it sounded so good, and it really matched the sound that we had in the early 80s, and was quite fitting in contemporary as well.
Yeah, now here's another weird fascination of mine. What 80s rock icons are doing for a living now other than touring? Right,
and you're putting me in that category.
Well,
to be sure there, just assume.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So what do you do outside of all this, and what are the guys doing?
I run a recording studio these days, pretty much. That's kind of the biggest thing outside of the band. I still do the band, obviously, fairly constantly, but I've been producing lots of new acts and a couple of oldies as well, And it's really nice here. I've got my studio at the old, used to be called Metropolis in the 80s. It was a really big sort of institution of a studio.
Oh, nice.
So I've got my room in there, and it's great. You know, there's a few of the old engineers still kicking around that we all know and reminisce all the time. So there's all bits of old equipment kicking around that looks like a museum. You know, it's great.
No, nothing wrong with valves.
No,
nothing wrong with valves,
most
man.
of it is on display being used these days. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it's great because I get to sort of relive it all again through a new generation of artists.
When you see the new artists come through, do you think you find they're just as excited and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as you were?
Yeah, it's really exciting for me. Like I can literally relive it again through some of these artists. It's really good. Give them all your wisdom and pass on your knowledge and you know all your experience, and it's a great trip all round.
That's you covered. What's Pierre, James, and Vincent doing?
Well, Vince and James both kind of semi-arty-farty, you know, just doing their own thing, music.
Yep.
Pierre sort of works in music retail, but he's still really actively in his music, you know, mucking around with his computer and things.
And once again, thank you so much for joining me, Brian Canham from Pseudo Echo.
No worries, mate.